Hello, everybody. Welcome to Where's the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. My name is Jane, and I am with my co-host, Sabrina. Sabrina, how are you doing?
Hey Jane, it's great to see you. Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm coming to you live from San Francisco, finally. Yeah, I'm here. My furniture is not. My furniture is still taking some time, but yeah,
Drama.
I'm slowly settling in, getting to know the neighborhood. So far I like the weather and the office has been really fun to meet some of my colleagues. So yeah, really enjoying it. Of course, the first month is always like hard, but we'll get there.
This
What's
is this our first episode with you in San Francisco?
It is, yeah. It's a
Oh my
new
gosh.
vibe.
I feel like we've been talking about this move for so long, for so many episodes already. So I'm
Yeah.
very glad that you've made it, but it sounds like it is a lot of drama. I can't imagine moving your entire life to a completely new city, but then also having a moving company move. So you're like dependent on their
Mhm.
schedule and availability and all that. I just came back from a trip. We had a corporate kind of get together, I guess. What is it called? Like a conference type of thing in Las Vegas that we do every year. So we did that. I won a big award there, so that was very fun. I felt
Oh,
very just recognized and loved and appreciated. And then immediately went from a very, very busy and chaotic work week into a trip in Nashville. Um, and that was very fun. It was relaxing. It was with my husband's family. So it's good to just relax. But now I'm back and not happy because I'm left with so much work. You know how like when you're gone for 2 weeks, you like don't want to think about it, but in the back of your mind, you know you're behind on everything. So
mhm. Well,
anyway,
congrats on the award. You deserve it so much. You've been
thank
working
you.
hard, so that's great to have the recognition.
Thank you. Thank you. I know I'm very happy and I know you've won before, so I will have to ask you about all the how to plan, how to dress for the event and all that. So I'm very
We'll
excited.
talk. We'll talk.
Well, all right. Today, I'm very, very excited. We have a specialist with us today as our podcast guest. But before we get into the episode, I do want to give a couple disclaimers and heads ups. In this episode, we'll be talking about weight management, weight loss, weight gain, and we recognize that this can be triggering for some of our audience members. So, if today's episode is triggering for you, feel free to skip the episode or take your time and listen to it whenever you are ready. Also, the information that is provided today is purely for education and it's not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any particular illness or disease. So, if someone is looking for a specific medical advice, please consult your medical provider. And in the end, we'll also make sure to provide our specialist's contact information if you want to reach out to her to learn more. All right, with that, like I mentioned, today we are talking about a pretty sensitive topic. Sabrina, I don't know about your experience. I feel like for me, weight and being healthy and like just this whole concept is so can be very frustrating. I feel like maybe it's not just for women, but a lot of times I know this can be very difficult for women. I know for me, weight has been something that's been very difficult for me. Like when I am 10 pounds, 20 pounds lighter, when I was in sports, in school, I struggled with my weight. I did not feel beautiful in my body. I did not feel healthy, even though I was probably at the healthiest and the strongest of, my life. And now my lifestyle has completely changed. We moved to America. The food changed for me as well. Our lifestyle changed when I went into college. Again, the lifestyle changed drastically again. And I've just struggled, even till now, I've really struggled with not only my weight, but also how I feel about myself, how I take care of my body. I've always really struggled with that. And it's definitely something I'm working with my therapist on, right? Like from a mental perspective, what can I do to think from a logical perspective, to change my own mindset, to have a more positive view into my weight. But yeah, I feel like this is something that's like kind of triggering for me to even talk about because I know I've kind of struggled with this. But Sabrina, what's been your experience with this topic?
Yeah, thanks for opening up about it because I'm right there with you.
Mm.
Weight is something that's also affected me my whole life. I feel like my weight was directly correlated with my level of happiness or the way I
Mm-hmm.
viewed my body. So, and I can almost pinpoint the day that everything like changed for me. So when I grew up, I never had to deal with it. Like before I hit puberty, I was just playing soccer all the time. But then I went to Australia when I was 16, and that was the time I think my body changed naturally already. And I've never had to like pay attention to what I eat. And so in
Mm-hmm.
Australia, different diet, right? You just eat fish and chips. You eat very unhealthy. Maybe I would have been more careful. But anyway, I never had to really pay attention to that. And so I gained a bunch of weight, but I didn't really notice it. And then I came back. My
Mm-hmm.
mom saw me at the airport, and the look on her face, I will
Mm-hmm.
never ever forget it. And I think this is something, honestly, like the way our parents view weight and bodies and how I think this has just been passed down from generations. I know my
Yes.
grandmother, the way she makes comments about different people, oh, she shouldn't wear that, or things like that. And
Yes.
so then it's just I started to pay attention a lot more. But yeah, I will never forget the look on my mom's face. And that really was a turning point for me to forever since then just be so wary of what do I eat? Oh God, I need to work out if I eat this croissant. Yeah. And so it was just, I mean, fast forward now, I've done a lot of therapy on it. I've kind of
Mm-hmm.
separated myself a little bit more and am less influenced by the number. I really want to make sure I feel good and healthy and strong.
Mm-hmm.
So thankfully I'm a little bit more separated, but it's still, I have days where I'm just, yeah, I just get so miserable because I'm like, I don't feel I should lose like 10 pounds to be
Yeah.
happier. So it's a constant race.
Right. And I think that's why we're very grateful to actually have a specialist with us today because a lot of this is tied to emotion, but then there's the reality of like what can you actually do to live a healthy lifestyle. So without further ado, Katie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Number one, I'm so excited to be here. It's great to meet you both. And thank you for sharing your stories about your weight journeys. I think that's really interesting. And you're both very brave for sharing your stories. So thank you for that too. So my name is Katie Strack, and I'm a registered dietitian. I've been a registered dietitian for the last 23 years. I've done a lot of different things throughout my career. I'm a military spouse, so that's part of the reason why we've moved a lot. So I've had to shift jobs. I've worked in clinical, I've worked in long-term care, I've worked in child nutrition. I've done healthcare sales. I worked for a food manufacturer. So I've done a little bit of everything. But what happened was I started struggling with my own health. And I was not getting the answers that I wanted to get. And so I started to learn more about natural methods. I sought out a naturopath, and that kind of like led me down this rabbit hole that I had never learned about in my classic training as a dietitian. And I decided that I wanted to learn more. And so I went and I got my master's degree in human nutrition and functional medicine. And it just blew my mind away with all the things that I was learning. I was absolutely fascinated. It was all science based. You know, it wasn't like a bunch of frou-frou, which I was a little bit nervous that it would be, but super impressed with all of my instructors that I had along the way. And it really just paved the way for me. And then I've received additional training recently where I went in and did courses that were all related specifically to functional nutrition. So kind of away from like the functional medicine, but it's still part of it. And so I received a certification that's just called IFNCP, which just means Integrative and Functional Nutrition Certified Practitioner. Really long word. But basically, the reason why I'm passionate about functional nutrition is because I've been trained how to get to the root cause of people's health issues by using tactics that just make sense. And we're not, I'm not a medical doctor. That is definitely not something that I'm touting. But I'm just passionate about it because those things helped me and they make sense to me. And so if I can help other people in those ways as well and use food and nutrition to help them heal their body, but also using other lifestyle factors that, again, as a classically trained dietitian, we didn't really learn about. So anyway, that's where I've spent the last about 8 years of my life, is in that functional nutrition world. I currently have my own business called Root Nutrition, where I see clients on an individual basis. And then I also provide consultation to other health and wellness businesses as well, where I'm working with their clients. So yes, I'm I'm
That's
excited to
awesome.
share more information with you today.
Oh my gosh, incredible. Yeah, you have quite the background. So excited to have you on and for us to tap into some of this knowledge, right? I also really like the term functional nutrition. Somehow that gave me peace. I know, because I feel like a lot of our relationships with nutrition and diet is like very dysfunctional. So I really resonate with that term. Okay, so obviously this is a very sensitive topic, right? And the way a lot of us view our weight is heavily influenced by like media and society and family, right? And so it's almost like, how do we define ourselves is very much, impacted by some of these external factors and some of this like standard of what does it mean to be healthy, et cetera. So Katie, would love to hear from you. Like, where are we at today? Like, what's your perspective in all of this?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with you that there's just this continued pressure from social media and reality TV that, we're supposed to look perfect and act perfect and lead this perfect life that doesn't exist, in order to be accepted, by our peers, by our family members, by our colleagues, whatever it might be. And so I think, and for me growing up too, like, it was, like you mentioned, kind of that transgenerational things are getting passed down, like, oh, grandma said this, grandpa said that, like, don't eat too much or you'll get fat. But yet we were in the clean plate club when I grew up. You had to clean your plate, whether you were full or not. And so, kind of like those things get passed down. We're not taught to embrace where we are. And so I talk a lot about that with my patients, like, give yourself grace in the moment, embrace where you are, because this is where you are today. That doesn't mean you won't get to where you want to be, later on, but we have to work with what we're dealing with right now. And so, a lot of times I have patients, they'll come in, I deal primarily with gut health, but I'll have patients come in that are really sick and they're crying, right? They're like, they're just like so frustrated. And they get to that point where they're like, I have all these other things, and they'll name all these symptoms. We'll say, I also really like to lose weight. And then we talk, so a lot of times what happens is once we work through those bigger issues, the weight comes off, but we're not necessarily working directly on that weight. But anyway, I think, back to that question just about where we're at today, I also have seen more on the other side of like, okay, I do, online shopping, right? Like I hate shopping. But so I do a lot of things online because it's quick, it's easy, but I see more a variety of body types being represented on, women's clothing websites than we used to see before. That was like the skinny Victoria's Secret Barbie doll looking model. So I think that's really important too. Maybe we are trying to shift that norm away from this hourglass perfect, figure. So I think that, that is something positive that is potentially happening too.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. Like we have a long way to go, right? But I agree that you calling out some of what has changed to the positive. Even when I look at like reality TV, slowly but surely, right? There are a few more different body types, even though long ways to go here. But yeah, you are right. Things are changing slowly. So let's level set for our audience, I guess, in terms of what does it mean to be healthy versus unhealthy? When you work with your patients, like, do you look at things like BMI, or is it purely based on how they feel? Is it the number on the scale? Like, walk us through that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, weight is just part of the equation. You know, it's BMI is an indicator of where somebody is, but I'll be honest, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to that. I go more towards how my patient is feeling. What is their main reason for coming in to see me? If it is for weight loss, great, let's talk about that. How do you want to approach your journey? If that means weighing once a week, okay, let's do that. If 9 times out of 10, patients don't want to weigh, they don't want to see that number on the scale. They want to go by how their clothes are fitting, how they feel mentally. You know, do they like their appearance a little bit more? You know, do they have more energy? Is their mood better? Those tend to be more of the indicators that I find people are looking for rather than looking at that number on the scale. Because they get worried like, okay, I'm going to make all these changes and my number on the scale isn't going to change, you know? But like you said earlier, you know, you're doing all the right things and your weight maybe still isn't changing, but you're feeling better. Okay, great. You know, that's fantastic. Of course, we do need to look at other things, you know, there's research, you know, on looking at like the waist to hip ratio and what those numbers should look like as other, you know, predictors of disease. Do we have high cholesterol? Do we have high blood pressure? Do we have diabetes? Do we have a strong family history of heart attack or stroke? You know, those are all things that we need to consider as well. And also looking at labs, you know, that can be another kind of good indicator of our health. But it's not one thing. It's kind of everything, you know, and that's what I love about functional nutrition is you're looking at the whole person and you're looking at, you know, the mind, body, spirit, you're looking at all the different organ systems where nothing is in isolation. And so, you know, as a dietitian, I think like, oh, healthy versus unhealthy, I automatically think about that diet, right? We all know that a healthy diet is, okay, you know, we're eating our fruits, our vegetables, our whole grains, our nuts, our seeds. We're staying away from those unhealthy foods, the heavily processed foods that really promote inflammation in the body. And so I think, you know, but a lot of it does go back to that individual person, and we're all genetically different. We all have different goals. We're all in different places. And so just meeting the patient where they're at is very important.
What's really interesting is we're recording this soon after the Olympics, and Olympus is one of those times where my insecurity actually is like my mindset has changed a little bit, because you see all these men and women athletes and they are so strong and they do not look stick thin. Many of which are they're like at the peak of whatever sport they're in, and they all look so different depending on the sport and the needs of that sport. And so I feel like a lot of times, you know, what you see on TV influences how you feel. And this is one of those times where I actually feel very positive about how and accepting that you can be extremely healthy and strong, but not look exactly the same. So this is just something that I was kind of thinking about as I was preparing this, because we're so close to like the Olympics time right now.
Yeah, that's a really cool perspective. I like that.
Yeah, and also on that note, Jane, because what I was told, and I don't know, I guess like muscle mass is like heavier than fat, right? So if you do start to work out more and you do grow muscle, then also the weight, the scale might go up. And so when I had to first like learn that, because I was like I got so frustrated when I saw, oh, my weight's going up actually. And then yeah, you look at the Olympians when they go on the scale, like yeah, they have a lot of weight, right? Obviously super toned and trained, but yeah, it's like it's crazy to just, you have to that point of like looking at it holistically. So I really like your approach, Katie, that it's not just like one thing. But still though, right, when we talk about diet, we automatically go to weight loss. So why this is something seriously I've been thinking about a lot, but like, why do you think that is? And what maybe needs to like change? We also rarely talk about the other side, right? Being underweight. I mean, you hear horror stories of people being anorexic and things like that. But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a tough one. I mean, I think you know, there's a lot of money around the weight loss industry. And I know, we'll maybe talk a little bit future about like the weight loss drugs and things like that have really been on the market for years. They've just kind of changed the way that they're approached, but and how they're the mechanisms by which they're being used. But I think that a lot of it is, there's supplements and there's shakes and there's drinks and there's this and there's that. And I just think it's being pushed on us, and it's a good moneymaker for the industry. I think that's a big part of it. It's obviously not the only thing, but I do think that's if we kind of follow the money that way, I think that is part of it.
So we do have our majority of our listeners are female, but we do also have a good chunk of male listeners. In your experience with your patients, how have you seen differences or overlap between female and male clients? Like, is body dysmorphia something that you see primarily in one gender or the other? How does it affect each of them differently?
I will say that the majority of my patients are female. And it's not always just about the weight. A lot of times, it's related to hormone shifts and things like that, and, menopause and things like that. So then, we are dealing with, well, I'm gaining the weight and I know it's the menopause. What can I do? With the males, I would say it's more of, I want to look good. I want more muscle mass. They're working out more. How can they gain that muscle? I personally haven't worked with as many men that are struggling with the weight, like obesity. But it is more that they still want to look good too. They want to go to the gym and they want to see those muscles in the mirror. And so how can they get there? So I struggle with, a lot of the supplements that get taken on that angle. And so that can be pretty challenging just to kind of bring them down to, okay, let's number one, talk about supplement safety. And then also looking at, okay, what are the foods that we can be eating to get there as well, so that we're not just relying on these supplements. So I think, yes, there is maybe some body dysmorphia with the men, but definitely not as much as I see with the women, just struggling with that image.
And this is what we anticipated as well coming into this conversation. Like it's obviously Sabrina and I, being women, we experience that firsthand, and we see that through media. We feel the pressure through family from all angles, and we assume that other women are experiencing the same. But it's so interesting that for men, like, I think there's just less pressure to lose weight. Like when men are maybe a little overweight or obese, like there's not too much talk about it, right? You see obese men even on TV and media, they're funny, they're silly, and they have this other personality. But when women are overweight or obese on TV, that is all anybody can talk about. And there's nothing else about her personality, her skills, her performance,
So
whatever. And so I think that's why we're so caught up, at least as women, because we're so concerned about, like, that is how people are going to perceive us, as at least as the first thing. And then you almost have to work your way to display your skill, your whatever it may be. So yeah, I'm not surprised that it's often women who are struggling with this. We know we're talking a little bit about dieting and healthy diets, but really a hot topic, and I think a lot of our listeners, knowing that many are women, are going to want to know more about diet fads. So we slotted this in as a topic to discuss with you. Let's start generic before we even get into any like specific ones. What's your perspective on diet fads?
They're just that, they're fads, and they're very short term, sometime a couple days. They're not sustainable. And a lot of people that seem to follow the diet fads, they do them all.
Yeah.
Like they kind of get addicted, like, okay, what's the next thing? What else can I try? That's been my experience with patients. Every time I talk to them, like, oh, I started taking this product, or I did this cleanse, or, and I'm like, oh gosh,
Yeah.
okay. What is it today? And let's talk through that.
I mean, I'm guilty of this. You might be speaking to the right person, because I have done the Whole30. That was brutal. I've tried the keto. I am kind of in an intermittent fasting. So yeah, you're right. The people who do them end up doing them all, and none of them end up working. And sometimes it works a little bit for, like, the week or
Yep.
two that you're doing it. and then your weight bounces back. Sometimes like it comes back even worse because you are so restrictive of like what you're doing.
Right.
So from your, like, based on your expertise, if some sort of weight loss process is working for people, are there things that people can do that make it sustainable, or is your perspective that diet fats are just generally not sustainable in general? You need a longer term solution.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends on, what the person is doing. For example, something like, paleo, that's pretty popular, where it's not something where we're super restrictive. It can be something that's followed more long term. I think if somebody finds something that works well for them and they feel good and it makes sense, and as long as they're not like tanking on their energy levels or they're not developing some kind of a nutrient deficiency, great. If that's something that you feel like you can follow long term for the rest of your life, great. And that's again like meeting that patient where they are. Whereas if you've got some of those short term kind of, the cabbage soup diet, I had somebody a few weeks ago, they did the watermelon diet. I just wild things that people bring to me. Which is great. I love it. It helps me learn. But yeah, I think it's figuring out what works best for that individual person. I'm not one that's going to be promoting, let's follow something for 3 or 4 days. But if it's something that they feel like works for them long term, or maybe we work on modifying the diet that best meets their needs. That's usually where we end up moving towards. But yeah, like you said, if you're doing something and you're losing a little bit of weight, you start to see that positive change, but then you realize this isn't sustainable, and then you go off of it, and that's where as an individual, okay, this isn't working for me, and need to try something different that makes more sense for me long term.
I think, at least from my experience, since I've tried a couple of these diet fads, one frustrating part for me, at least, like, I think there's two components. One is just like some of this food is just not exciting to eat. Like, I'm not excited to be just drinking liquids, like, so that's one component, is the taste and the feeling. But a big part of it is actually the difficulty of going to your local grocery store to then find the right thing. Because when I was doing the Whole30, I remember I could not find anything that would fit into that category. And because it is so restrictive, it's so hard to stay consistent with that particular diet because I just can't find anything. And the ones that I could find didn't taste good. It was just very hard to sustain. And there's like multiple reasons why it was very difficult. But I do think, though, a lot of times these diet fads instill a level of fear in us, right? Like, there are some people who genuinely have gluten like allergies and issues, and they need to stay away from certain foods. But then for a lot of us, it becomes a trend, and everybody starts, being allergic to gluten and can't do this and can't do fats. And one thing I'm learning is also there's like healthy fats, and you should have fat in your diet. So I guess I'm still learning about how to balance my diet and not be fearful of certain things. But what's your experience, and from your like background, what are things that people should actually be afraid of and concerned about versus things that are just, trending right now?
Well, like you said, there are medical reasons that sometimes we do need to avoid a certain food, such as gluten for celiac disease. Now we've learned more where there are people that are very sensitive to gluten. So while they may not have celiac disease, they're still very sensitive and they're still getting those really awful symptoms. So we would need to cut those things out of the diet. And the same goes for food sensitivities related to gut issues. I see that all the time. But yes, even that, when somebody is needing to cut those things out for medically related reasons, it can lead to that level of fear where they start to not want to eat anything. There's actually, it's not anorexia, it's not bulimia, but it's called avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And so I have seen, more and more of that happening because of some of these things, well, I can only eat organic raw food because I'm terrified of X, Y, and Z. And suddenly we're eating hardly anything. And, okay, we need to scale back and start, kind of from those baby steps again and start over. So it can be challenging, but I think we should be cautious of heavily processed foods. We should be cautious of food additives that are in those heavily processed foods. And so when I say processed foods, I'm talking about like the chips, the cookies, some certain crackers, the cakes, all those kinds of things that you can buy on the shelf at the grocery store that have a long shelf life. You look at those ingredients, it's full of things that you can't pronounce. You're not sure what they are. Food dyes is another one. It's really sad. And those foods they're very accessible. They're marketed to children, they're used in schools, all those kinds of things. So it really is a problem. We've lost our connection to the basics. We've lost our connection to food, where it's grown, how it's grown. We want to be supporting foods that are grown sustainably and safely, and foods that aren't full of pesticides and herbicides that can make us really, really sick. The problem is those foods are typically more expensive. And so we need to figure out ways to navigate all of that. We should be very mindful of those processed foods, fast foods, kind of in the same category. I can go down the whole toxin conversation about the packaging used for fast foods. All those kinds of things really promote inflammation in the body, and they can affect everything. So it is important that, we're promoting those healthy options, the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, the nuts, the seeds, the herbs, and eating a variety of those kinds of foods on a regular basis. Yes, of course, proteins and dairy products and things like that are also important, and they have a place in the diet. But yeah, we definitely need to become more aware as the consumer about what we are choosing to put in our grocery carts. And also where we're shopping, even going to the farmers markets when we can, and utilizing, those connections with the farmers and the types of the foods that they're growing, but also how they're growing, and having those conversations with them about how that's happening is so important.
Yeah, it's so tricky because I feel like, at least from an American perspective and experience, as you were speaking about all the different types of foods that we should be concerned about or try to avoid, I'm thinking, okay, let me imagine the grocery store, right? There's that middle section where it's just like mac and cheese in a box. They last for forever. And
Yeah.
I can imagine for a lot of people, like that is what they need to purchase, because a lot of, like, even from my own experience, we have farmers markets super accessible down the street every Saturday, but I'm always hesitant to buy there because the food goes bad really quickly. I have to be prepared to commit to a meal like immediately. Whereas even the groceries, like the fresh groceries from the grocery stores, last longer. And so there's just all these, that it's a lot of mental load to be thinking about which item should I buy, but then also how long is it going to last? Am I going to be able to feed my entire family? And it just, yeah, I really resonate with that because it's really tricky. And as an immigrant, when we first moved to America, we didn't have a lot of money to be buying the whole foods of the world, right? So it was a lot of packaged food. And I have certainly noticed that that's also when I gained a ton of weight, because I'm just eating frozen meals, and like that is what we could afford. So
Right.
that's the
Yep.
reality for a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely, especially right now. Yeah, it's a problem. If there's any listeners, out there that receive SNAP benefits, you can use SNAP benefits at the farmers market, and they do have match programs as well. So that's something I like to share with people, because a lot of states do offer those match programs, which I think is really powerful. So it at least gives you, another opportunity to try those fresh fruits and vegetables that maybe aren't, happening otherwise.
Yeah, that's good to know. I had no idea. All right, let's pivot to this buzzword of the last, I guess, decade, right? Like Ozempic. So many people are talking about it, whether it's Ozempic or for like Wegovy. There's so many more coming out of on the market, popping up left and right. And I've had some people in my network that actually seen some great results. I'm a little bit skeptical, and yeah, Katie, hearing from you as someone that's in the field, like, help us understand, do they work? What do they do actually? Is this sustainable? We need to know.
Yeah, definitely a hot button. We're surrounding that topic of weight loss, and people are often looking for that quick, easy fix. We want that magic pill or that magic shot to kind of make those things happen. So a lot of these drugs, the GLP-1, the glucagon-like peptide 1, they've been used for type 2 diabetes for blood sugar management, and then they've also been used for weight management. So when we eat, we release glucagon-like peptide 1, the GLP-1. That is something that happens in our body. And then that stimulates our pancreas to release insulin, which then brings, our blood sugar into the cells for energy and brings the blood sugar down outside of those cells. And what it does then is it slows down that gastric emptying, and it promotes fullness. It gives us that signal like, I'm full, I need to stop eating. And so essentially that's what those GLP-1 drugs are doing for us. Since we do produce some of our own GLP-1, there are ways to naturally stimulate that. There's been a lot of research done on different probiotics and specific strains that can do that, specific foods that can help stimulate that, which I think is absolutely fascinating. But, over time, those signals can sometimes get dampened, whether that's related to age, medication, stress, there's all kinds of different factors there. And so people often are going to the doctor and they're going, yes, they've heard about all these medications. Can I please have some? So as far as pros, I mean, they do stimulate weight loss for those reasons I had just mentioned. There's a lot of things that we need to consider, before somebody is going to take one of these medications. And from my experience, that's not happening. There's not a whole lot of like conversations going on. They're just asking for it, they're getting it. When somebody already has a compromised gut, and they've already got digestive issues, and now we're going to be taking this medication that is reducing our appetite, also reducing the amount of food that we're putting into our body. Essentially, we see a lot of issues with like constipation. A side effect can also be diarrhea. The nausea, the vomiting the nausea is pretty common for most people right up front, just because their body is adjusting to everything. But so the digestive system needs to be in good working order before we're kind of, bringing these kinds of things in. So that's number one, that I don't know that that's really being talked about as much as it should be. Number two, I look at it as, okay, is this person already struggling with nutrient deficiencies? Whether we've done, advanced testing on that, or we just know that their diet is very poor in nutrient dense foods. And then we're again adding something in, a drug that is reducing appetite. So we're eating less. We might only be eating once a day. We're not getting those nutrients. We're just not. So I look at that as well. We might be losing the weight, but we're not being nourished. Hydration is another big one, because our desire for thirst goes down as well. And so we often find more issues with dehydration, which can also contribute to that constipation I talked about earlier. So that's another one. So the other thing that I think about with weight loss for anybody, whether you're taking one of these GLP-1 medications or you're doing something more naturally, as we lose weight, toxins come out of our fat cells and they're circulating. So if we're not eating well or we're not supporting the natural detox processes, we've got different phases of detox in our bodies going on all the time, and we can promote good detox through proper nutrition. So if we're not getting that, we're not promoting detox. So we need to make sure that we're, if somebody is taking this medication, these are all the kinds of things that I'm working on with them, making sure that they've got good processes in place. If somebody goes into this and they're not exercising and they're not eating well to begin with, they're more likely to have a lot of these side effects. And long term, it's probably not going to be as helpful for them as it could have been. So that's kind of my perspective. I think we need to do more education on the diet and the lifestyle and really push people to get to those, to where they're feeling good beforehand. and then maybe they won't want to go on the drug, you know? I think for certain people, it can be necessary and it can be helpful just depending on the situation and where they're at. Maybe they can't work out. Maybe they're suffering from complications of type 2 diabetes and they can't even stand on their feet, but they're overweight, you know? And so there's cases like that where sometimes, okay, let's consider this, but it's not easy. I've had patients go off of it too, and they're struggling. They never get their appetite back. They have all kinds of GI issues. And so it's not perfect.
Yeah, I think that's the takeaway. Thank you for laying this all out.
Yeah.
And so many people look to this instant solution, right? The one size fits all. Just let me take it and I'll be forever fine. But
Yeah.
there's so much more. There's so much more layers. So are you concerned though in terms of how society promotes them? I know a lot of celebrities have taken them, and like, are you concerned for generation, like for like, yeah, maybe people that are a little bit less educated or people that just look to that? Are you actually concerned, or do you think it's going to pass? It's not actually.
I mean, I think with anything, it usually does pass, but I'm shocked at how many patients, you know, it's like every week I have another one coming in going, I'm like, okay. And then I ask them, how did that conversation go with the doctor? Tell me more about that. Cause I want to know, you know, did you discuss other options? Have you tried to lose weight? Have you tried to, you know, exercise? That doesn't work for everybody. There's so many other things to weight than that. But I agree. Like, I think a lot of it is the lack of education. And two, what I'm seeing is people will get put on these meds and then they run out and they can't, the supply is not there. So, you know, you're dealing with that supply demand issue. And then for people that need it, you know, if they are diabetic and that's what they've been relying on for blood sugar control, well, then you have that issue too. So it's tricky.
Sorry, I was gonna say, I remember like maybe a year ago now, the medication ran out, and that was like all over the news about how everybody is using this medication for weight loss now. Every celebrity's on it, and so there's no supply for people with diabetes who genuinely need this medication. And so
Mhm.
it sounds like now there's more options and there's a bunch of different formulations of kind of the same thing, but I remember that vividly. That was all over the news.
Yeah. Yeah, there's different types, different names coming out. There are some natural versions. They're not drugs. They're more like a nutritional supplement. I personally haven't used them yet, but I've learned about that recently, and I think that's really powerful too. Like I said, if we can use things more naturally to start, I think that can sometimes just take people, they're going to navigate away from that kind of quick fix. If they're like, oh, well, there's something else that I could try that isn't maybe going to give me all these side effects. And not everybody will have side effects. Of course, we're all different, but from my experience, there's been a lot of side effects.
So obviously your work focuses a lot on a healthy gut and using that to like eat naturally to then holistically change your body, your weight, whatever that means. Help us understand in layman's term, right? Because
Yeah.
there's obviously, we talked about so many different ways to manage your weight. What does it mean to have a healthy gut microbiome? What is prebiotic, probiotic? There's
Yep.
so many different words, and there's fiber, and anyways, help us understand with layman terms.
Yeah, definitely. Well, my own passion for gut health comes from my own personal health struggles. I've struggled with gut health for as long as I can remember, even as a kid. I think a lot of that was anxiety related, but that's kind of another topic. But it can be so debilitating, right? I mean, I got to a point where I could hardly eat anything. Everything upset my stomach. And you know, to learn how to heal your gut. You've got about 70% of your immune system is housed in your gut. And so if you've got an imbalance in there, you've got an imbalance everywhere else in your body, whether that's coming out as, you know, headaches or skin issues or the actual GI issues or, you know, mood disorders. I mean, it can really affect so much more than we ever knew. And so you know, you hear about like the gut brain connection, and that is because of the vagus nerve that runs from the brainstem all the way down to the gut. And so part of that, I do a lot of work with patients patients that have like the irritable bowel syndrome, that struggle, and we talk about the vagus nerve. How can we stimulate that vagus nerve to relax the body, which will then relax the gut? And so as far as like, how do we know if our gut is balanced? I think that kind of goes back to how are we feeling overall? Are we feeling really good? Or are we coming in with all of these symptoms, like I mentioned, with like the headaches or the food sensitivities, the brain fog, the joint pain? I mean, there can be so many things. And of course, those aren't always related to the gut, but more often than not, once we kind of work on fixing the gut, those symptoms resolve. And so I would say, you know, looking at a healthy gut, it goes beyond even looking at the really extensive labs that we can see through stool testing and things like that. It goes to more like what is happening systemically in the body and what kind of symptoms are we experiencing.
So it's a lot more complex than just eating your fibers every day and taking your supplements.
Yeah, I mean, fiber's great, right? Fiber, as it gets broken down in the gut, that's kind of our prebiotic that feeds the probiotic, which then, you know, creates that healthy gut microbiome. The more variety we get in our diet, the more diverse our gut microbiome, and then the stronger our immune system. And so, so fiber is very, very important. You know, the average American is only getting about 14 grams of fiber a day. We need to be, you know, closer to 30 grams or more. So that's, again, like getting back to those basics of those whole unprocessed foods, and really focusing on all the other components too that go into that. You know, probiotics, that's always a question I get. We don't have to be taking if we don't have a specific health issue, you can stimulate good, you know, probiotics in your gut and good gut microbiome by just eating those fibers. With that said, getting the probiotic rich foods from like the yogurts with the live active cultures, or some of the fermented foods like kimchi or sauerkraut, just tiny amounts of those can be helpful each day as well, at promoting a good balance in the gut. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that we can approach it without going overboard. So yeah.
This might be embarrassing to admit, but I'm a big fan of the Activias, the Metamucils, because sometimes I travel a lot for work and then I'm traveling for fun, and sometimes you're just not eating, you know, you want to be enjoying the food when you're traveling, right? So sometimes I'm overindulging or eating, you know, unhealthily. And so I do really enjoy my Activia and my Metamucil. But what's your experience with supplements? Because we talked a little bit about how like that can actually genuinely help a lot of people, especially if they're not taking in just naturally, let's say, fiber. What's your perspective on supplements and pills? And the reason why this came up is when we were researching about like gut health prior to this, the first couple were all just ads for supplements. So how does one go about deciding what works for them?
If I have somebody come in and they're very fragile, they've been suffering for a long time, you know, my approach is going to be a little bit more cautious. And even using probiotics on somebody that's very fragile can sometimes be too much for them. You might have to start really slow at a much lower dose, and then work up from there. So everyone's going to be very different. But, you know, from the perspective of supplements and things like that, I think just learning about quality supplements that are third-party tested is the best place to start. And so if you're looking at a label, you want it to say like NSF or USP, there'll be a little disclaimer on the label. And that tells us that that lab has been tested, or that particular supplement has been tested by another lab saying, yes, what you're saying is in here is actually in here. And we're not just having a whole lot of fillers and things like that in this supplement. Probiotics, using those probiotic rich foods like the Activia, that's actually a great one. I do recommend that a lot to patients, even though it has some sugar in it. It's quick and easy, and it's something that people recognize. There's nothing wrong with that. And so, you know, I think, again, you have to meet that patient where they are. Not everybody wants to jump to using those supplements, but they can be helpful. Then for somebody that's really compromised and they need, you know, more support, then we can look at some of the supplements that are designed for gut healing specifically that are going to have a lot of different like herbs and things like that in them. And so again, you really need to be careful with that and know what you're doing and make sure that you're not, if you're on any kind of medications, that we're checking for interactions there and things like that. So it's not something that I would ever say, oh yes, if you're struggling, just go out and buy something off the shelf. You should definitely be working with a medical provider on something like that.
And to know like what to look for in the label is, I mean, that's tactically what people can do when they start shopping for these. So that's very helpful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely.
And Activia, if y'all ever want to sponsor us, clearly we're big Activia people. So Katie, we know that obviously having a healthy gut is really important for feeling better, and you mentioned like sometimes people naturally will lose weight through eating healthy and having a healthier lifestyle. But what are other benefits, right? Like, do we experience less bloating? Does it impact skin health, right? This is kind of there's probably a holistic impact with having a healthier gut.
I feel like it affects just about everything. They've even found connections between the gut microbiome and like our lung health. It's continuing, it's exploding, it's very interesting. So yeah, there's that gut brain connection that I mentioned. There's a gut skin connection, definitely. If our gut is angry, we've got a lot of overgrowth of the bad gut bacteria that can come out in the skin through acne or eczema or even hives. Bloating, I'll see a lot of, patients that come in and they've got like the bacterial overgrowth, like the SIBO, the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And there again, there's a lot of different things that we can do just by modifying the diet and taking out some of those foods that can be irritating, not for long term, but for short term, and then gradually bringing those back in to figure out where their limit kind of is. So again, yes, finding that balance for them so that they can relieve that bloating. Constipation and diarrhea are very common as well, so if we can kind of regulate things and figure out why those things are happening, and then make those adjustments, it's very powerful. Certain nutrients are actually made in the gut, and so if we've got an imbalance, then we're kind of missing out on that as well, which I think is super fascinating. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Oh, okay. This has been so informative. Thank you, Katie.
I'm learning so much.
We're learning so much, and I still have a million more questions, but we are coming up on the end of our podcast. So if there's one big takeaway, it's clearly like one size doesn't fit all, right? So it's a lot more nuanced. So for our listeners, like how would someone go about finding what would work for them? Do you have any recommendations? Like if they want to lose weight, if they want to build muscle, like where's like a good place to start? Obviously, there's such an overwhelm of information online. Do you have any tips on how to go about that?
There's a lot of bad information out there, so I just be really careful about the sources that you're looking at. Places like Mayo Clinic, Harvard Health, those kind of general websites I would push somebody towards, rather than going to like TikTok or YouTube, where a lot of, there can be some helpful information there, but not always. So I think doing your due diligence and listening to people that have those certifications and they know what they're talking about is a good place to start. Getting back to basics and asking yourself, how much processed food am I having versus how much whole unprocessed food am I having? And just gradually making a change to making it more simple, not feeling like you have to rely on all of those shelf-stable foods. Or if you're feeling that way and you're struggling, financially, well, those are all things that, we can help you with as well. And utilizing, other resources that are out there for you is a great place to start as well. It doesn't have to be like this, like health is only for people that have money. That's just not true. There's a lot of different ways that we can go about this, but I think getting back to the basics is a good place to start.
I love that. And yeah, I was at Whole Foods on Sunday, and I was again faced with the choice of like, oh, I can buy all this great, healthy, fresh produce, or I can just grab the ready to go meals. And so I think for us all to have that reminder. So I'm going to be a lot more intentional now as well. And you're right, even though some of these things might be more expensive, but there are ways around it. If you look for them, the coupons, etc., I think there are small steps everyone can take if you're actually putting your mind behind that. I really like that. So yeah, before we go, any like last advice or any like a golden nugget that you want to leave with our listeners? There's one thing from today.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that food really can be medicine. So we need to choose wisely what we're putting in our body because it can also be very poisonous. So we need to be careful about what we're choosing and where we're spending our food dollar.
Incredible. Well, we are at the end of our podcast. Katie, this has been such a pleasure. I want everyone to know like where they can find you if they're interested potentially in doing a one-on-one consultation or taking advantage of your services. Also, any projects or on the horizon for you, plug away.
Thank you so much again for having me. It was great visiting with you both. So you can find me at therootnutritionist.com. You can email me at katie@therootnutritionist.com. And then as far as right now, I'm running a promo. So for the listeners, if you mention the line when you contact me, I'm giving 15% off of package prices. And then Jane or Sabrina will just put the deadline in on that as well. But yeah, reach out to me. I love hearing from people. I'm happy to at least point you in the right direction. If I can't help you, I can point you in the right direction. But I'm really passionate about what I do, and my goal is to help people essentially get better and feel better. So
I think that really shined through today. So it's been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, for our listeners, thank you for the very generous discount that you're offering. So we'll put everything in the show notes, all of Katie's information. And so feel free to reach out to her to learn more. And so, yeah, as always, we want to hear from our listeners as well. If you've struggled with weight loss or any sort of diet related issues, please let us know. And subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast. We are on Apple, Spotify, and also now on YouTube if you want to watch. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk